Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Change Exchange podcast. It's delightful again to be talking with Kimberly about all things change. Having a conversation recently about change complexity, and it's something which is so relevant at the moment that it's a much more complicated, difficult world than we had before, and it would be really good to share some of your thoughts on change complexity.
So one of the things that really informs this thinking is that we are, as you just said, living in a more complex world, that wild world of change, as we've called it before. And as we are navigating that world, it therefore, I feel, automatically begs that we have adapted, more agile, adjusted approaches to managing change in complexity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can see exactly how that works. For me, it's the difference between the way that we were looking at change before we went into this wild world of change, and we were talking about change being change being a little bit feral, where we could actually nicely compartmentalize things to into a beginning, middle, and end, and life's just not like that anymore. And I absolutely get it. So for me, what do you think are the key differences between us looking at tame change to sort of wild feral change? What's the difference between the two from your perspective?
There are a few things, and I'm chuckling with you because it is so true. It is a bit feral out there. Our world is a bit wonky. So I think really taking from that the lack of predictability in the work that we're doing, right? These assumptions we have about control are challenged. This sort of anti-linearity is a consideration. But I like to encapsulate the concepts within this acronym I call FINE. Fine change. Change is fine. And it's broken down in a few areas that we can chat about, hopefully. First one, F, not maybe the F that we might think about when we're doing change, but feedback. The importance of feedback loops. Gone are the days, if they even really existed, where we had these neat, tidy, gorgeous, top-down driven communications, that we had everything sort of knotted up, that we send out an email or a missive and it was done. Again, if it ever was. But really, feedback is more about handling the reactions. If we're doing all the things that we lovingly plan and change, we still don't really truly know how they're landing or if they've landed unless we have these loops. So this is an idea about the fact that, in this sort of wild state that we're in, we should and can and will, connect better dots by having these robust feedback loops where people can, in real time, throughout an entire change, be able to communicate their needs and their feeds.
Yeah, and who in particular are you thinking of with the feedback loops? Because one of the things that complexity sort of lends itself to in my thinking is um, you could just think about what's going on within the business, within the organization, but so often change isn't about just what's going on inside, it's about going on what's going on outside. And how do you do that with such a complex external environment as well, which I guess is all part of it these days?
Yeah, yeah, I like this. I like where you're going with that because it's this whole notion, and it's not fully threaded even in my mind, but this idea of whole change, right? Whole people, participating in these changes, even though they are organizationally driven, right? Even though they are business generated. So change networking is a component, feedback, looping or generation that I like to lean into, where we are building a change organization that is designed to engage, to communicate, to collaborate in ways that are, if I can use a well-worn word, holistic to the change process. So it's not just about subject matter experts and process owners and managers and leaders, but it's also about digging in around the feelings, the mindsets, the things informing individuals as they walk through the doors, when they come to work. Um, it's about taking in, which I think leans into a lot of your focuses, if I may, around those external factors in markets, right? Those socioeconomic indicators that may be informing the systems in which we're performing and living, from that macro level. Um, where I'm looking at feedback loops is really crystallizing and funneling those perspectives into working places within the change process around the successes that we're trying to generate, to be able to surface, um, and assess and then respond to what is happening within and without the change.
Yeah, I love the idea of this idea of actually bringing people into it. But also what I'm hearing is that need to actually meet people where they are today rather than actually anything else. So actually we don't expect them to make the change before we've seen where they are. So bringing them in so that we're actually in the same place when it starts. Such an important concept. And yeah, I can see why that's important. I am aware of the fact I've also interrupted you halfway through. Fine.
Well, I was just gonna say, it was a segue. It was almost like a paid promotion, Nick. We are moving into the I, which is interconnectedness, which is really exactly what we're talking about. So if we're creating, opportunities for feedback, for reaction, for response in real time, it's creating interconnectedness. We're assuming that as we're building out these change orgs. Uh, Hopefully we're building it as well. But it's not just people. And again, I think this is where, you and I have talked about our focuses and change before, where we lean in respective to our practices. So what I want to thread in here is the importance of systems interconnectedness, the idea of really understanding the systemic view of change, when it can be, as you well know, very siloed, even, from an investment and an initiative standpoint, almost rigorously overdefined, right? There's not a lot of room to explore where that change is creeping into other parts of the world, of the organization. So it's this idea that with an unpredictable environment, with feedback, as we're building out this word fine and interconnectedness, we have arms around the organization and we're able to also see the ripple effects of change.
So the next bit, I guess, in fine, we've got the interconnectedness coming through. What's the next bit? Because I'm keen to know what the last two bits are, being a bit of a completer finisher.
So we are moving into nonlinearity, which we've already talked about. So it's this assumption that not just that we're living in an unpredictable, nonlinear fashion when it comes to navigating and delivering change, but that we actually should assume that even in change delivery, not everything is created equal. So change in itself, as it's being engaged, designed, delivered, is actually a sum of many parts. And there could be small changes that have significant impacts, whereas a larger change might have relatively little impact. So it's this idea of constantly being in a position, assuming nonlinearity, that we have a relationship between effort and outcome that's not always proportional. So it's expecting uneven change, imbalanced change, opportunities where we least expect them, and maybe not the bang that we do expect in the areas we feel we've planned for.
That's such an important point because the idea that you know what the future is going to look like and nothing's going to push it offline, it seems so alien to certainly my experience. And from what you're talking about, I can absolutely relate to this idea that sometimes it's a big project and there are very few changes. Sometimes it's a small project and there are very few changes, but you suddenly find that something massive changes. And that ability to respond to that is something which I don't think we've necessarily really got to grips with in the whole industry and the whole profession of change. This idea that agile isn't about being able to do it quicker, It's about being able to respond quicker, and that's what I'm hearing from what you're talking about.
Yeah, responsiveness, I think, although that's a whole other conversation again. You and I keep discovering brand new podcasts in the work that we do. But you're absolutely right. And I think a key in responsiveness or how effective it is in these conversations that you and I are having, such as this one, where we are anticipating in some ways the unanticipated. It's not planless, it's not without design, it's not without a level rigor and intention, but it's flexible, adaptable, and agile enough to be able to ingest the information that we're receiving because we don't always know, and there's room for that. We're open to feedback, which we've just talked about. We're expecting that, through an integrated or interconnected system, that there is going to be variability, right? Diversity. But then also, to your point, we need to be positioned to respond. So the last letter, if you will, in this little acronym that I have around, find change is around emergence, the things that you and I are talking about right now. And that is that we're permitting through this process, right, in managing complex, unpredictable, wild, viral change, that we are positioning ourselves to be open to emerging themes, solutions, new behaviors, new ways of thinking, opportunities in ways of working that we couldn't possibly have anticipated when we're in that initiation and planning phase, right?
I love.
But then it brings us back to your point about with all these things, then um, is the requirement to respond.
But I'm wondering whether there's a point about emergence which is even before the change starts, and how have you used that concept of emergence to help people understand the nature of the change which they're going to be involved in? Because that seems to me to be because change is constant. When they start it, it's already started changing. And have you got any perspectives on that?
Well, I think that's an interesting question. I think the assumption is in many change initiatives that there is a top-down directive, right? So we all do that great work, I hope, where we're positioning effective to leadership, right? To our sponsors, to our stakeholders, to understanding the landscape. So I think that assessment phase is super important in creating the understanding around the change. We all do that, but I think the extra piece is in creating the expectations around how we're going to model it, such as we're discussing now.
So I guess I'm beginning to think, okay, well, what lessons can we draw if we're living in this complex, wild, feral, difficult to predict, likely to nip your hand off if you're not careful sort of world? What are the things that we need to do?
So really, when we're looking at things, it's first of all, I think having the appetite and a bit of the courage, if you will, to move beyond predictability. We're challenging notions of success really when we look at how change is normally blueprinted. And you said this earlier, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? And we package it up neatly and we call it a change day. So I think first it's the invitation to move beyond that linearity. Have I said, as I said earlier, the assessment, the planning, the perspective. We still have to paint a picture of change that all levels of organization um, are receptive to and engaged in. Um, but in working in this way, in managing change complexity, the encouragement is to experiment, embrace experimentation, be open again back to emergence, to what themes, what behaviors, what potential alternative solutions may be emerging that do support the change narrative, that do reinforce the plan, and probably better than it was when we imagined it to begin with. So again, back to the feedback loops, back to the assumption that, change teams, if you will, change groups, change networks are created precisely to be able to perform in service of the change and success from the perspectives of the people and hopefully diversely within these groups. And then I think the last piece is really making sure, and you mentioned this already, that we're agile, meaning adaptable, flexible, nimble in our approaches, that even with, the best designs that we have on change, that they're built with room to adjust and to pivot and to grow and to embrace these discoveries. And why that is, taking all of these things into consideration is that if these are incorporated within the change deliverables that we're chasing, and we allow for these things to happen, we actually build a lot of buy-in and motivation. People are feeling connected to the change. They're also feeling that their recommendations, their thoughts, their feelings, their mindset, where relevant and warranted for success, are included.
Mm.
We can celebrate that the organization is not just going through a change initiative, but they're actually in the early stages of owning it, and also being taught behaviors that, frankly, and I've said this before in our conversations, where we wave bye-bye, they are in a position to be able to transition and sustain that change with new behaviors that maybe they didn't have before.
That's a great point. I mean, for me, what you've described is really making it real for them. They're actually living this, and they're living the unpredictability and the ability to experiment. And one of the things which I've seen used, and I've used before, and you may have well have done as well, is the use of something which takes them outside the head and more into the heart. And that's a great way of doing it. I love doing rich pictures, especially when you give them the pen and you say, you draw what you see, you draw what you want to see, and just let them go, because that sort of use of experimentation allows them to think the complex and the unknown, and draw the monster. We can do those things.
And I love that. Well, I appreciate just how visual that is, because I think you're leaning into something that is truly wonderful when it comes to also alternative ways of imagining and designing change. If currently in a client situation, we're doing journey mapping, and it's quite common around customer experience and those activities, those user experiences. But we've expanded that view into our change activities to be able to have various people within our network participate in plotting, as you said, right, at drawing the monster, and from their positions, making discoveries about what we think works and what we think doesn't,
Mm.
and being able to surface really early the things that we need to pay attention to, even when it comes to designing how we're communicating and how we're actually designing learning and development, those kinds of things. So I really love that idea of being able to visually map these activities.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this idea of using the other side of your brain to, it just sounds to me much more authentic and much more fun.